Everybody, it's EK back with another episode of the Devy Dose. And tonight we have a special guest on, budding fantasy superstar, Noah Hills. Say what's up for the people, Noah.
What's up? What's up, Eric? What's up, people? I'm happy to be here. I've been really just like in my own world over here, so I'm excited to talk about these running. Like I need to just get it out. I'm excited to talk about them. So very happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you on. As we were talking a little bit before we started rolling, I love what you're doing with the website. I've been on there poking around. Other people that I like and respect and know what they're talking about have had nothing but good things to say about the content. And from having you on in our interactions, I know you're for me you're in an elite tier of people who are really doing this thing. And I'm
Thanks,
psyched for
man.
you that you're starting to fire it off the full time. I mean, like I admire the crap out of that. So
Thanks, man.
plug the site. Like, what do you got going on? What do you
Yeah,
launch for
yeah.
content on there this week?
Yeah, I noahmoreparties.com. We've got three articles a week, really. Two of them or one of them free, two of them behind the paywall, but three articles a week. And we've also got rankings for Devy leagues, dynasty leagues, and rookie drafts. It's all running back stuff. This just today we dropped a Deneric Prince article, kind of looking back over his combine performance, his rushing efficiency metrics. We had a Kendre Miller article recently. I've done like 3 or 4 Devon Achane articles. So we got Evan Hull up there. We got all sorts of stuff and things coming like every other day. So come subscribe. Even if you don't subscribe, come read a free article. Half of these paywalled articles, I give away half of them for free and throw the paywall in the middle of the article. So come to noahmoreparties.com and poke around. It'll be a good time.
Try it, you'll like it. NoMoreParties.com. And you're making a name for yourself as an RB guy. So I think it's fitting. You were slated for the RB show with me, and I'm stoked to have you on. So I think first, before we get into the weeds of running backs, did the combine change anything significant for you with these guys or with other positions, whatever?
Yeah, I think there's a few little things that changed. Like I think Chase Brown being 5'9", 209 instead of
Mhm.
5'11", 205. That's significant. It's a small difference in each area, but helped him on the aggregate. So that's good. He was really athletic.
Athletic,
A
yeah, I
lot of
was
it's
impressed.
yeah. I mean, he was really athletic. Like Jerick McKinnon levels athletic almost. But a lot of the top guys, like the guys that really matter in this class, kind of are who we thought they were. I think Zach Charbonnet came in a little bit lighter than we thought, but he's still big enough.
Mhm.
He ran a little bit faster than we expected, maybe because he was a little bit lighter. So that makes sense. But Achane, Gibbs, Bijan were all around their like listed sizes. All ran around what we thought they would. Like Achane didn't break the 40 record, but he's still really damn fast.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I guess the big thing that changed for me, well, I don't know if it changed, but Zach Evans came in at 202 pounds,
Yeah,
had
man.
gotten hurt like a week ago or a week before the combine, and so he wasn't able to run. So we didn't even get to see like some stupid good 40 time from him at 202 pounds. He just showed up at 202, wasn't able to test, and then left. And so
Yeah.
I've been wrestling around in my head with like what does that mean for me? What do where do I put him in my rankings? Which has kind of led to what do my rankings mean? Is it just like who do I think are the best players? In which case, Zach Evans shouldn't move at all because whether he played at 202 or 215 or whatever, he's as good as he was. So why should I move him? But if this is about fantasy football, 202 at 5'11" without a strong receiving profile matters quite a bit. So that's
Mhm.
probably the most kind of impactful number for me from the combine was Zach Evans, 202 pounds instead of 215 or 210 or whatever. That was fairly significant, I think.
Yeah, honestly, I expected him to come in lighter than 215. I've been saying it all off season, but I was shocked to see 202. In my head, I was like, I'll be like 207 or 205. Who cares? Even when doing his film, and again, like we were talking earlier, like I think the things you do great is really quantifying things as you go, and I struggle with that, but I'll take notes and I'll be like, the power is not really there with Evans, not really a tackle breaking machine, makes people miss, right? Super elusive in the open field, but I never saw 215. And I was like, if he is 215 and it's not showing up on tape, that's almost worse for me, right? Because you're not playing to your strength.
Right.
Yeah, he is tough because the receiving profile, just a very low volume, always, right? Never
Lots of
got a good
drops.
market share. Yeah, lots of bad drops too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, one of the one game that I broke up on film was just like right at the beginning of it, just turned catch boom.
Yeah.
That's rough, man. The positive that I have on that though is he does have a good yards per route run, which isn't always like just linearly translate, but for me does show that either when he was getting the opportunities, he was really explosive, right? Or he was just generally efficient with the opportunities when he got them. So I'm kind of like, there's some hope for me for having that role at the next level, but the drops don't inspire confidence in me that an NFL GM is going to be like, oh yeah, this guy is going to get third down work at 202 pounds. It's a tough sell for
Yeah.
me.
I'm kind of at the same spot with his receiving profile. I think, yeah, not a lot of volume, and he dropped a lot of passes, and neither of those are good things. But I do agree that there's like a little bit of hope. There was that 2021 season at TCU where he was throwing the ball downfield. He's got like a 2-yard ADOT for his career, which is pretty substantial. Like not a lot of guys are targeted that far beyond the line of scrimmage from the running back position. And if a guy just is completely incapable of doing things for you in the passing game, that's not the way you use him in the passing game, right? If he just can't do it, you're going to keep him, maybe you'll throw him a screen or you'll throw him a check down every once in a while, but he was being thrown the ball beyond the line of scrimmage, dropped some of them, and it wasn't a ton of volume. But I think, there was a coaching staff in a Power 5 conference that looked at Zach Evans and was like, we can use him in, some creative ways in the passing game. So I think that there's some hope there. I think some of the drops were concentration drops, in my opinion. Some of them is just like look fairly inexplicable, but I think that's a technique thing or a concentration thing. I don't think he's physically incapable of catching footballs, So if he can clean that up a little bit, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to contribute in the passing game. He just might never get there.
Yeah, right. And that's the issue for me. It's just what are coaches going to see as the role for these guys, right? No one's going to see Zach Evans' size and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to run this guy up the gut 15 times. No one's going to draft him to be like a goal line back or banger, although I do think he's a really good goal line back in the way that like an Aaron Jones is, right? Just like it's good vision, really creative at the line of scrimmage. So I guess it's tough for me. And I honestly, I know everyone's like, oh, draft capital is all that matters for running backs. I feel like if I'm relying on draft capital and my evaluations, it's a complete cop out. That's just how I feel. I'm not pooping on anyone
cheating.
else.
It's cheating.
It's just like, why didn't just draft by draft capital? Why bother to do any of this?
Just wait until the NFL draft to learn these players' names and then just pick them.
Right.
That's not fun.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's not fun. It might be prudent. Might be a good use of your time. Certainly not fun. But I was going to say for Evans, though, like it does matter for me, right? Because if someone drafts him as a top, 45, 50 pick, then like they have a role in mind for him. And hopefully they understand his strengths and want to use him that way.
Yeah. I do think I have a little bit. I think I've noticed like two different camps kind of forming on Zach Evans where specifically with like his physicality, where I watch him on film and I see a really physical runner who is fighting for extra yards on every play, breaking a lot of tackles, has elusiveness, but it's sort of like in a subtle way. He's not like throwing all these dead legs like Eric Gray or Tank Bigsby might, but he makes people miss by, these like little swim moves where he's still kind of moving fluidly up the field. But what you just said about like you don't really see a powerful runner, I've seen that, kind of said on Twitter and other people's analysis. And so there's like these two, he's kind of an enigma on tape. And from my perspective, I think if he is a physical runner, and even if he doesn't play at 202 pounds, like that's the number that NFL teams now have, and he has an injury history. And I'm not a doctor. I don't know if his injury history is something that will be problematic for him going forward, but NFL teams might think it could be, and NFL teams might think he's too small at 202, and NFL teams, whether they think he's too physical for such a small back or whether they think he's small and not physical, like those, like you can see the outcome where he just falls in the draft, or coaches don't have confidence in giving him a workload because of the injury history and the size, all this stuff. It's just becoming harder and harder to project Zach Evans as like a useful fantasy running back when these tests, weigh in above 210. He failed that test. Stay healthy. He has not been able to do that. It's just harder to buy in when these little pieces of the profile keep like slipping away from him.
Yeah, right. I definitely feel significantly differently about 215 pound Zach Evans, even though I didn't think he played to that strength. And again, I think, and there must be just games that people have fixated on where like he is or isn't displaying these traits. And I'll say he does the fighting for extra yards. I get that. I never once saw him like really like run a dude over or push a pile. And that's where I was just like, if you're 215 pounds and you're strong physical runner, like I want to see that like once in a while. Like you hit a guy and he goes down and you don't see that. You do see the, I love what you said of the subtle movements, being elusive in that manner. I do see that, like hand fighting, going by guys, things like that. I think is a real strength for him, but that's, but whatever. His upside's Aaron Jones, but like that might be his draft capital too. We might all be crying about our Zach Evans bags in a few weeks here. So obviously, I'm sure we could spend 3 hours on any one of these prospects. That's how you are. That's how I am. But I did want to take some time and step back for a second and talk like general process. Like, what does Noah's process look like? How do you integrate your film and data? What do you care about for data in general? And how are you using that? How are you quantifying that? I want to know some of this stuff for myself, but I also think that the people that watch the show would love to hear it and get an insight into your brain. I got one of my sheets up just to kind of be able to look at the names and stuff. But if you have anything you want to throw up, feel free to share your screen too, or or just launch at it. Sorry, I gave you a wide open topic, but take that where you want to go.
Perfect. Okay. I guess in general, I'll just kind of describe my process as I want to understand players better. And so I want to try to kind of isolate performance in specific areas as much as I can. So the things like dominator rating or speed score are just like very general. Like this guy was productive in the context of his offense, or this guy is fast for his size. But I want to know, like, how does that speed manifest on the field? In what ways was he helping his offense on the field? And so I've kind of developed these team relative efficiency metrics kind of from the data standpoint that, describe, given the box counts he's seeing, how efficient is he on a per carry basis? How consistent is he on a per carry basis? But kind of the more kind of narrow the focus gets in any of these categories, like all roads just lead to film. So like you can't get more specific than just watching film and writing down what happens. And so that's kind of where I've ended up. And so now my film study, essentially what I do, my goal is to watch a decent amount of carries for each guy. So I've got a good sample. My goal is 100. Can't always find 100, but it's around 100. And basically what I do is on each run, I classify it as either a gap or a zone concept. I classify it more specifically, kind of within those categories. and then I grade players in like 6 different decision-making type, kind of categories, like vision, patience, discipline, things like that. And they either get a positive grade, a neutral grade, or a negative grade on each play. So it's just good, bad, neutral. So it's a little bit of a judgment call, as any film study is, but that's the best way that I can, kind of ground my observations. Because one thing that I have trouble with is like if I could watch a whole game of a player and kind of at different points recognize, oh, he missed a hole there, or oh, that was a good juke, or wow, he looked fast. But at the end of the game, I can think back to like those specific moments, but how pervasive were his good jukes, or how often was he missing a hole? And it's difficult to just kind of calibrate that in your mind from like a glob of plays that you took away some takeaways from. And so I have to just write it down on each play. And so then I can generate like averages and ratios of positive to negative grades in various categories. And then outside of decision making, I'm also charting things like at times when a guy like attempts some sort of evasive maneuver, and I categorize that by the type. It could be like a spin move or a juke or a dead leg or whatever, a jump cut. How often is he doing that? How often is he succeeding at doing that? As well as how is he powering through contact from different types of defenders and different types of contact? How often is he, completely breaking those tackles versus gaining extra yards versus just being tackled versus like giving up ground, like losing his momentum through this contact. And so I make note of each of these things on each play, which I think it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. But at the end, then when I've watched, 80, 100, 120 plays of each of these guys, I can look at the big picture and see, okay, Sean Tucker had some nice jukes on film and like looked pretty explosive and elusive, but this is just a hypothetical example. But, despite looking like that, actually compared to all the other guys in this class, he was not very elusive on like a per attempt basis or, things like that. So I think it helps me filter through my impressions of guys as I'm watching them from like a subjective standpoint and help me ground them in something like a little bit more concrete, even though the concrete numbers are based on subjective film study. So I'd say that's the process.
No, I love it. So, all right. So, do you turn that into a quantifiable number and then in some manner combine it or balance it with the statistics? Or are you
Right.
just like ranking off your film grades now?
Yeah, I haven't produced like an overall film like grade or score for each player. I haven't kind of found a way to do that yet. I am able to generate like play level averages for each guy and like gap concepts and zone concepts and compare those, or compare, overall how good is each guy at powering through contact and kind of sort a spreadsheet by that. But as far as kind of like marrying things with the data, I also don't really do that with the data, honestly. Like I have these metrics that I kind of look at next to each other, but I'm not doing much with like a score that I spit out at the end. And so really what it is okay, there's these numbers from the data, and then there's these numbers from the film. I don't want to like look at one over the other and decide, okay, the data is more important than the film, or the film's more important than the data. I want to look at the results for each guy and think, how do these things make sense together, and draw conclusions based on that. And sometimes that's difficult. And I think sometimes, and when the film and the analytics, kind of diverge quite a bit, then you're left with more of a judgment call, really. But oftentimes you can tell yourself a story that makes sense with, kind of both of them working together.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I think I think our overall process is similar, but you're like obviously doing a lot more work generating these film scores yourself, these film rankings yourself, and you're have these more peripheral metrics or compound metrics or whatever that are
Yeah.
fascinating. I love the box adjusted efficiency score. I really do like that. There are a lot of people throw a lot of metrics around them, kind of like does it like translate to fantasy points? But like the box adjusted efficiency, I get that and I totally see the value of it, and I think it's really valuable. But the whole like how do you combine these two things, right? I mean, you can see like most of my work's up here. I'm taking like a bunch of data that correlates well to fantasy points per game. This is like the traditional route of doing the data scouting, right? And then I'm
Yeah.
throwing in Lance Zierlein's film scores just so I have an objective film data point, which kind of
Right.
balances out where the data is really high or really low. And that's like the reason that Sean Tucker is not a top 3 running back is just his data points because of the volume. If you use counting stats at all, like his counting stats are phenomenal. And that really like drags him. If you use any kind of actual production or market share, that really drags him up rankings, even if he's not
Right.
hyper efficient. Just like
Yeah,
I
especially
felt,
like in the receiving game where his numbers look nuts in the receiving game, but look past like the target share and stuff, and he's not Alvin Kamara out there, even though he was throwing the ball a lot. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it really
Just the
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well,
I was
it
gonna
just like
say
it. Okay,
you
you
first,
go
Noah.
first. You go first. I'll go second.
Okay, so I was gonna say yards per route run 1.22, not a phenomenal number. He's but he was the engine of the offense, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
another question I got for you too. Not to go on a tangent, we can cycle back to this. But do you find, because I find this like anecdotally, that guys that have extremely high volume almost always, and we see this in the NFL too, are generally going to have lower efficiency numbers, right? Like if you're out there every field, whether it's because you're getting worn down or because the defenders are just like seeing what you're doing or whatnot. I just feel like the heavy volume guys almost always wind up with slightly lower efficiencies. Like, do you agree? Do you have any way of accounting for that?
Yeah, I do think that's true, and I think especially in the NFL and especially like in college in like the SEC, maybe the Big Ten, like the better conferences. I think like Achane, I think is a good example where his efficiency went down quite a bit this year from like a raw perspective. His yards per reception, yards per target, yards per carry, things like that were not as good this year, but he was easily the best player on a bad team, just getting absolutely fed the ball every single week. Of course, he's not going to average 8 yards a carry anymore. He would have to be Gale Sayers in order to do that. And he's a
Right.
great player. He's probably not Gale Sayers. So, yeah, as far as like how do you account for that? I think just I don't have like a built-in sort of like analytical way of doing it, but I think just recognizing the situations where that's the case um, is important to get kind of like I don't know, just kind of calibrate your expectations for a player in a different situation where he's not just the focal point getting fed the ball in disadvantageous situations all the time.
Right. Like I like to, do the thought experiment. Like, what would Sean Tucker have looked like, playing at Old Miss, right?
Mm.
Getting 14 carries a game, and that would he have looked better or worse than Zach Evans? Would his skills have translated better? What would he have looked like taking on Kenny McIntosh's workload at Georgia? Right? Like, do I think
Yeah.
he would have excelled in that, or would his efficiency be higher? I think they're interesting. I feel like I have to do that. You know what I mean? What would these guys have looked like at UCLA? Like, and some people knock Charbonnet and think he's not anything special, but I'm like, I don't feel like too many of these guys would have done more with that volume of carries in that offense than Charbonnet did. Um, just it was getting the rock like 30 times a game.
Right.
I don't think you could ask most of these guys to do that.
Yeah.
So, trying to think of anything else. Like, so you're not really combining them right now. You're just using them then kind of intuitively, or just making like just subjective judgments as best you can, laying all the data out, looking at it on the table, and trying to say, okay, I want this, and I like this more than that, and this is where I'm at. Is that kind of how
Yep.
you
Yeah.
arrange your rankings?
Pretty much exactly. Yep.
Nice. Yeah, man, that's awesome. So, and I don't want you to give away the secret sauce. Do you want to? I think the box adjusted efficiency was the first like Noah things that caught my eye. Do you want to talk about that or how you get to that number a little bit? Just people
Yeah.
might be interested without like I don't need the McDonald's sauce.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to give it away. I'm fine if other people know how to calculate it. So basically, it started as yards per carry plus, which basically just means if Bijan Robinson at Texas last year averaged 5.8 yards per carry, and the other running backs at Texas collectively averaged 4.3, Bijan Robinson's yards per carry plus is 1.5, which I think is fairly helpful in kind of calibrating. Okay, he averaged 5.8 yards per carry, but how impressive is that in the context of Texas's offense? Maybe that's actually bad. Maybe it's good. But by looking at what other guys were doing in the same offense, you can, kind of make smarter judgments, I think, about how players are performing on a per carry basis. So that's yards per carry plus. But yards per carry and yards per carry plus has these issues that we all know about, where running backs carrying the ball on first and second down into heavy boxes are just going to, in general, are just going to average fewer yards per carry than the guys who come in on 3rd and 8 and take a draw for 6 yards, or, get lined up in the slot and get a jet sweep going to the outside on like an obvious passing down. Like the efficiency of those players is just not comparable, because the situations they're carrying the ball in are not comparable at all, even on the same team. So to kind of circumvent those issues, I created kind of yards per carry plus, but at the box count level for every player. And so there's a lot of good research out there from Ben Baldwin, maybe Josh Hermsmeyer, but a lot of the like Big Data Bowl entries from a couple of years ago were looking at we can predict the outcomes of running plays relatively well by looking at how many defenders are in the box before the snap. Like that's a large determining factor on its own of the outcomes of rushing plays without even knowing what type of run it is, or who's carrying the ball, or what down and distance it is, all that kind of stuff. Just look at how many defenders in the box and you have a decent idea of how successful the running play is going to be. And so if you can isolate those box count situations, or the comparisons of efficiency to each box count, you get a much cleaner comparison between what Bijan is doing against 6-man boxes against what everybody else at Texas is doing against 6-man boxes, rather than comparing their carries overall. So you make that comparison at each box count, at 5-man boxes, 6-man boxes, 7-man boxes, 8-man boxes, and then you average them together and it spits out their box adjusted efficiency rating. So for Bijan Robinson, it's like 109% or something, I think. Let me find it here. Bijan Robinson's career box adjusted efficiency rating is 114%, which basically means, given the kinds of box counts that he was running into and his performances against those box counts relative to how his teammates were performing against the box counts they ran against, the average carry for Bijan Robinson was worth 14% more yardage than the average carry for all other Texas running backs collectively during his career. So it's maybe a sort of a complicated calculation, but I think when you break it down by its parts, it's just kind of an intuitive progression of comparing yards per carry between teammates.
So, all right, So you're just comparing the box. So you're comparing the yards per carry of Bijan at a 5-man box count to his teammates at a 5-man box count, and that's how you're getting, not to like a college average number, right? But
Yeah, the first one.
yeah, just
Yep,
the team. All
correct.
right, cool. Yeah, yeah, man. I love that. I think you're on some good stuff over there. I think you're going to be you might be the next reception perception type thing for running backs. So keep it up, keep it up. Cool, yeah. And I have I was actually looking at some of the yards per carry of a team, which I don't know. Yours hand charted might be a little better than one by whatever that came in this data set. This data set's got some stuff in it sometimes, but we're talking about that. Tucker's YPC over team is actually really good. He's at like a 2.07. Achane, of course, is wrecks the metric, right? That's what we would expect him
Mm-hmm.
to. But Tucker actually is a pretty good one, and I think that's the only aspect of that where I start to ask questions, not like cutting it out, but I'm just like, does Sean Tucker have a 2.1 yards per carry over team because he's awesome or because his teammates were really crappy at Syracuse?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. I think obviously like the answer is always probably like both on some level, right? But yeah, I do
Yeah.
think it's an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, that's sometimes difficult to calibrate as well. I do have some kind of like rushing efficiency scores and stuff where I put different weights on these metrics and use I uh uh kind of quantify like the talent level of their teammates by looking at
Mhm.
how highly touted they were as recruits, which isn't perfect, but I think it gets us in the ballpark, and kind of, and I can use that number to kind of adjust their efficiency stats to kind of contextualize how impressive it was, but that's all subjective as well. So it's kind of looking at, all right, he averaged 2 yards per carry more than his teammates in this particular situation. You can look at other guys in similar situations. Um, how well did they perform to kind of calibrate how impressive the number is for each player. So yeah, there's just a lot of moving parts to wrap your head around.
Yeah, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and we'd all be millionaires because we would just be betting on the NFL draft.
It's true. It's very true.
So I guess my other question or thought, and I don't want to stick on this too much longer, although it's fascinating. I'm sure anyone watching this will get bored at the 15-minute mark of listening to us in the rabbit hole of data scouting. So how do you deal with the problems when you're charting of offensive line talent, opposing team defensive talent? Because I find, if I watch Sean Tucker against Clemson, and then I watch Sean Tucker against like, San Jose, whatever, like fill in the blank G5 team. Like he looks a hell of a lot better. You know what I mean? And he's juking people more, and right, and obviously like not just stuffing the stat sheet, but he also like you know, is hitting holes better because the holes are there longer. But for me, that stuff's very, very hard to quantify, right? Like there was a game, one of the main games I scouted for Tucker was against Clemson in 2021. He just got shut down on everything except for a couple big plays. But when looking at it, I felt like he was making the right reads. I felt like he was getting to the hole as efficiently and quickly as possible. There was just a linebacker at the 1 yard, 1 yard out of the hole in every single play. So, that was just I had a problem in trying to reconcile that and sort that out in my own scouting. I don't know how you've dealt with that problem.
Yeah, that's tough as well. I think the way that my process, or the way that I'm like grading all these traits on each play, generally most of these traits just get a neutral grade on each play. Like it's not like it's often where, like patience, for example. Patience, like Kendre Miller is a really patient runner, I think. Um, but even his patience doesn't manifest on all plays, and it doesn't manifest on most plays even. Maybe 20% of the time he exhibits patience that like really helps him identify a hole that wasn't there previously, something like that. So, but for the most part, he's getting a neutral grade. Even if he's one of the most patient backs in the class, he's getting a neutral grade on most plays, just because that's the nature of, I don't know, that's how things happened. So, and so I think the fact that most of the grades on each play are neutral, if they're running counter and there's some, blitzing linebacker who comes through the A gap and tackles Kendre Miller in the backfield before he even had a chance to follow his pullers, he's not getting a negative grade really anywhere for that. It's just neutrals across the board because he didn't do anything wrong. He might have, I might have to note that he got tackled and didn't break the tackle, which is, maybe technically negative, but we can't expect him to break every tackle. But from like a decision-making standpoint, he didn't do anything wrong. So, that helps a little bit with the neutral grades, but that doesn't take care of the issue where maybe Kendre Miller has way more plays blown up in the backfield or way worse blocking or played way tougher defenses or whatever it is than DeWayne McBride did, which probably is true. So DeWayne McBride, I think, is a good decision maker and a smart runner, but he's also playing against lesser competition and then is therefore has more advantageous situations. So his good traits can show up more often than somebody playing against tougher competition or behind a weaker offensive line. And so in those instances, I kind of look at their ratio of positive to negative plays. So even if Kendre Miller isn't able to show his patience as often as he would be able to if he was playing in Conference USA, he's still being patient a lot more often than his like indecisiveness is hurting him, for example, where even if McBride has a lot more like larger gaps and things like that, he still might be making mistakes just as often as he's making smart decisions or identifying the right holes or exhibiting patience in the appropriate spots. So I think, kind of looking at play level averages and as well as like how frequently are you making mistakes relative to how often you're making, positive plays. It kind of helps kind of make up for those differences in situations. But yeah, it's definitely tough because like DeWayne McBride got really good grades from me on film, but I know that part of it is just he was running in advantageous situations and was able to take advantage of them more readily than a lot of other backs in the class, just given the situation. So that's it. There's always this kind of contextual calibrating you have to do, because you're never going to get one-to-one comparisons, which is frustrating, but just, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's an art, not a science, right? I'd love it to be a science, plug it all in, spits out the guys that are going to be studs, but it's probably always going to be unrealistic, no matter how much effort we put into it. We're just approximating the curve a little better every time.
Yeah.
Right? All right, cool. So let's get to the nitty gritty. And I know this is a great conversation with you because I know your rankings. You're like, F the consensus. I don't care. On one level. So I think last week, Kyle Larson and I talked through and our rankings. His rankings were very much so have not changed since the end of last year, which I think you got to respect in some ways that like all the, the minutia and the vagaries of the offseason haven't really affected him. For me, they have a little bit, but mostly I'm working off of, my composite film and data scores here, with exceptions of just like guys that I know, like subjectively that I really think are just better than we're seeing on the scores or worse than we're seeing on the scores for one reason or another. So we talked about Bijan at 1, obviously not too much to say there. You might have some stuff to say, but Gibbs, I do still have it 2, and I've wrestled with it endlessly. And the receiving upside makes him such a valuable fantasy football asset that it's tough for me to put anyone else there. And then we talked about Evans at 3, but I'm super wishy-washy on that. You can see that my model really prefers Charbonnet, prefers Abanikanda, prefers Eric Gray. I don't prefer Eric Gray, but it does. I think part of that is I kind of juiced yards per route run in my model more so than the actual R squared or the P test told me to, just because I was like, I care about receiving upside more, and a lot of my models pulled off of a big and older data set where like I don't think the NFL
Right.
cared as much about receiving upside even 6 or 7 years ago. So we
Yeah.
talked about Tucker and we talked about Charbonnet, and those are like my top five in one way or another. So how does your top five diverge from that, and why, and what do you think's significant there?
I have Bijan Robinson at number 1. I'm not. I think he's great. Okay, I don't need to turn this into me nitpicking Bijan Robinson, so I won't do that. Bijan Robinson is my number 1 running back in this class. He's good.
Yeah,
My number
not
2
flawless,
running back.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's 4 other guys who I think you could make an argument in any order in the next 4. Evans is there for me, Charbonnet, Gibbs, and Achane. Right now, or pre-combine, I had Evans at 2 because he was a 215-pound running back who I thought was one of the best pure runners in this class with, some developmental upside as a receiver. Put that guy at 2. I have since moved him to 5. I reserve the right to move him back to 2 later if I change my mind, but he's currently my
he does
5.
a pro day and it's not horrible.
Right. Yeah, if he's 207 and runs like a 4.47 at his pro day,
yeah, I'm in.
Come on. Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned the receiving upside with Jahmyr Gibbs being kind of the difference maker among that group, and I'm on board with that. Like I can see that being the case. But I don't have Gibbs at my number 2. I have Achane 2. I think he's a significantly better runner than Gibbs is, and I think he's not Gibbs in the passing game, but he's functional there. He can catch a swing pass and make somebody miss out in the flat. He can go up the sideline on a wheel route, and I don't know who's going to cover him because nobody can stay with him going up the sideline. So I think Achane is good enough as a receiver and really good as a runner. So that I think he's got a more comprehensive skill set than Gibbs does. But I would not be shocked if 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, Gibbs is, getting Alvin Kamara. I don't necessarily agree with the Alvin Kamara comp overall, but as a receiver, I definitely see it with Gibbs, and he could be getting that same type of usage and be putting together top 5 fantasy seasons. I'm completely on board with that possibility, and he's my RB3. If I had to decide right now, who do I think is a better player between Achane and Gibbs, I think it's Achane. And then I have Charbonnet at 4. He could be the RB2 also. Like he's just a well-rounded guy without a lot of flaws in his game. And those kinds of guys get volume. Like Leonard Fournette didn't turn out to be the freak stud that we thought he was, but he can catch passes and he's reliable and he's big and he gets a 3-down workload because of that. David Montgomery gets a 3-down workload because he's big and reliable and can catch passes. Charbonnet's in, somewhere on that spectrum, I think. So he's got a really high floor in my opinion. And I wouldn't be shocked to see any of those guys be the RB2 in this class. So that's a big tier for me. My rankings of their talent levels no longer match with my rankings of their fantasy value because Evans came in so small. But yeah, right now I have Bijan, Achane, Gibbs, Charbonnet, Evans.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And honestly, my take on Achane is exactly what yours is. I just think Gibbs is going to get just part of it's the NFL draft hype. Like every like in the know NFL analyst, Daniel Jeremiah, all those guys have him as their RB2 going early second, late first kind of draft capital. And I'm just assuming someone's going to just immediately throw him on the field and start throwing him the football. But I'm with you. Achane is competent catching the ball. He doesn't look like he doesn't have the fluidity that Gibbs does, just like at the catch point and transitioning. But man, he's fine, and he is, greased lightning as soon as the ball is in his hands, right? I mean, like the efficiency of just like being able to catch a screen pass and dust 6 guys for a 40-yard gain is, that's going to make it attractive to him as long as an offensive coordinator doesn't think he's like a liability blocking and he can run the right routes. Like they're going to get him on the field,
Yeah.
So
And
I'm totally
I
with you.
think with Achane, I'm assuming like second round draft capital at this point. I think he's special enough to get that as far as speed and skill set goes and things like that. And if a team invests in him that highly, I think that because he's so unique, you don't draft a 188-pound running back in the second round to then decide 3 months later that he's too small to get the ball or too small to play a lot. So I think if he gets drafted in the second round, which it seems like he maybe third, but if he's a second round pick, I'm pretty comfortable with him where I have him. But he's a guy who could move down significantly if he doesn't get the draft capital that I think he will, because in that case, teams presumably decided he was too small. So that would have an effect for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, though. Everyone knows how big he is, and all the draft nicks also love him. They all have this same feelings about him that you do. So, I mean, Jeff is really high on him. His co-host from Saturday to Sunday, Paul, is really plugged in. He's been on him as the RB2 or RB3 for months. So
Yeah,
I think
nice.
you're in good.
I think Achane's the best pure runner in this class. I think pound for pound for sure, but just from like a skill set standpoint, even given how small he is, I think he runs with a decent amount of power. He's a really good decision maker. He's creative. He's just so good and so smart as a runner. And in that area, I think he's better than anybody in the class. If he was 210 pounds, I might have him over Bijan, but he's not. So.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he would be my next guy, and I totally get the argument for him over Tucker, and I could see myself doing that. It's tough for me to diverge from the data entirely. Although Tucker did take a big hit in my model after I plugged in the film scores. Not that he had a bad film score from Zerline, but it was substantially worse than the other backs in that tier in this class. Right, he gave him a 6.1 as opposed to Achane's like 6.24, but that's significant, and I've weighted it fairly heavily.
And Zerline's got that weird scale where everybody's separated by like half a point, but it means something significant. Yeah. So yeah, that kind of 0.14 difference doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it means something.
Yeah, I think I'm basically just taking like the score -6, and then I'm multiplying it by like 4 or something to actually make it like something that has some
like
scale
scalable.
To it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're below 6, then like you're a backup, right? Like you're getting whacked. The only guy last year that was below a 6 that was any good was Rashad White, which again, not the best runner, but just
he wasn't even that good as a rookie. Yeah,
no catch the ball though. So speaking of guys that were a sub-6 score from Zerline and would be one of my next guys, I get the feeling you like Kendre Miller, but he got a pretty poor score. I don't know. Is he in your top 7 or 8, or is he a little bit lower for you?
He's in my top 8. So I have him in that tier of like, I think I'm somewhat interested. His film was a roller coaster for me because it was so fun to watch. He runs harder than anybody else in the class. I think like watching him run was like watching Marion Barber run back in the day, or, Damian Pierce or Javonte Williams. Like he's one of these guys who just fights for every last little inch he can get. But I didn't love his vision. Like I felt like he made frequent mistakes in that area. He's very patient. Let me see what I got on him actually. Where are we? Yeah, especially on gap concepts. I think he's a better gap runner than he is a zone runner, so he doesn't have to read as much. He can just kind of pace well behind polars, hit the hole and fight for whatever is there. but yeah, from a decision making standpoint, from like a technical kind of cerebral standpoint, maybe I was not very impressed. Like he's one of the worst guys I've watched in that area so far in this class, but he's so good in the open field, making people miss, fighting for extra yards, that at some point it's like, okay, if you're not making the right decisions at the line of scrimmage and you are successful as a college runner, which he undeniably was, he was very efficient at pretty much every season of his career, more efficient than Zach Evans while they were both on the same team. He was obviously a workhorse and an effective one last season. He was a good college running back. So like, how is he doing this if what I'm seeing on film as far as decision making is the case? And I think it's because he was just so good as a tackle breaker. And so then the decision comes down to, is he athletic enough? Is he big enough to be special in that area in the NFL to the degree that will help make up for some of his other shortcomings? And because he didn't test and probably won't test because of his, I think it's an MCL injury that he's recovering from, it's just hard for me to get on board when I need I don't always care about athleticism, but with a guy like that, I do, and I'm not going to get proof of it this offseason, so it's hard to fully be on board.
No, I hear you, and yeah, I mean, and that was immediately. I don't have the skill you have, grading, the vision, and things like that. But even on film, for me, just in casual observation and on my video notes I made, you do see him make some wrong reads. You see him blow some stuff, where he's causing a negative play, right, through his read. But like you said, man, he's electric in the open field. He is that big, like he is this big, right? He's not
220,
Evans.
215, yeah,
easily. And I think he runs sub 4.5 just from watching him. I think he's got some burst, and I do think he has high end top speed in the open field. So I hope he won't, though. He won't even get to do a pro day, right? But
right, yeah.
I do think he's that fast. So maybe he's a guy that's a faller in the draft because of the injury, the lack of testing. But he's a guy that we can get, that an NFL team can get in the 4th or 5th round and really have that Dameon Pierce kind of impact as a rookie. And even my other question on him too was the same thing we were talking about with Evans, just the lack of receiving work in college. But I've had other people say that they thought he looked pretty good when he did catch the ball. I don't really have an opinion on it. He was certainly fairly efficient. 1.3 yards per route run is a good yards per route run. And his yards per touch is absurd, although that has a lot to do with his yards per carry as well. But he was also efficient with the limited amount of receiving work he got.
Yeah, I haven't done a really close, kind of study on his receiving work. Really, I don't even pay attention to pass catching that much when I'm watching film, just because I am so focused on the running stuff. But yeah, his numbers as a receiver don't really stand out to me. Not super high volume, wasn't used super creatively. His catch rate's not that high. I didn't see him like dropping a ton of passes, but he's not catching a ton of balls either, like on a per target basis. But yeah, decently efficient. I don't think he's like awful there, but he's probably a guy who will get pulled off the field on 3rd down, or that just won't be his role. Like, I don't think he'll necessarily hurt you by being out there, but there will probably be a guy on his NFL team who can play on 3rd down better than he can, is basically what I'm saying.
It's true. It's a great point. Yeah. I mean, 29 career receptions, 6% reception market share. Those are like bleak numbers, but always the like, is it that he can't do it or just that he didn't do it, but like, I think it comes down to like, coaches probably aren't looking at this guy being like, oh, we got to get him in there on 3rd down. That's a thing that if he does have that skill set and we just haven't seen it, he's going to have to earn that in practice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So unlikely to be a thing that he gets as a rookie. Maybe a skill that he can develop or a role he can play if he does, stick and get some work. So where where do you want to go from here with this next tier of wide receivers? Who was your RB6 then? Was it Tucker?
I have McBride.
Bride.
McBride is
I
up there
love
for
it.
me.
I love that. So
Yeah, and
let me.
I think I've seen some people who also really like McBride, but I think for the most part, he's kind of at the back end of this group or just kind of a wait and see type guy for a lot of people. But I intellectual honesty based on my process just dictates that I don't put him any lower than like the top of that tier because his efficiency numbers are ridiculous as a runner.
Mhm.
His film was almost completely mistake free. Even though he had the advantage of like low level of competition and things like that, he was just so good on film, so clean on film, and the efficiency numbers are good. He doesn't catch passes at all. I'm not sure if he can because he's one guy that just literally wasn't asked to do it.
Not
So
at
we'll see
all.
there. And he's got a fumbling issue, I believe. But the fumbling seems like something you could take care of. Uh, if he doesn't take care of it before he starts getting the ball in the NFL, he might lose his opportunity to continue getting the ball in the NFL. But that's a fixable issue. And I think if we just acknowledge like he's probably not going to contribute on third downs much. He's a 215-pound guy who doesn't look like a slug out there athletically, and he's making good he just has kind of the total package as a pure runner above a lot of the other guys in this class, I think. So I like him as Jordan Howard is a lofty comp and also a convenient comp because he also went to UAB, but he's another guy who was like 220 pounds, really efficient in college, didn't catch passes, just a pure runner who came into the NFL as a 5th-round pick and was productive. I wouldn't be shocked to see DeWayne McBride do the same thing.
I wouldn't be shocked if he gets better draft capital than that too. I feel like Howard's maybe a little bit more powerful, but yeah, I don't hate the comp at all. And yeah, pretty much the same page, right? I think he's going to get some draft capital. I think he's going to get day 2 in some way. And you can see, like, my model actually has him as the RB5 in this 4 in this class. This guy left Corum in there just to kind of see where he fell.
I've got Corum hanging around too in a lot of my stuff. I loved him. I just can't let him go. I like to see his stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about McBride. For me, I kind of just don't know what to do with him. The G5, the level of competition thing, although I do control for conference to the degree that, the data testing tells me I should, right? Like they gets me the best R squared. And it's not a huge adjustment. They get knocked by like a quarter point, something like that on my model. That's like essentially like a 7 or 8 point scale. But yeah, his data profile is phenomenal. Just a tackle breaking machine. Good yak, 7.79 yards per touch. That's stupid, But like you said, like a literal 0 in the receiving game. Kendre kind of weak. 5 catches for McBride in his career.
Yeah, he's like Jarrett. Remember Jarrett Patterson? Was that like a year ago or 2 years ago? Who came out of Buffalo, didn't catch any passes, I think, as a junior. But Patterson was like 200 pounds. McBride's probably 215. A 215-pound Jarrett Patterson who runs, mid 4.5s is pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I think mid 4.5s I think that's conservative too. I don't think he's going to be like a 4.45 guy, but I think I could see him running like a 4.50 or something like that. Or 4.55. I think that's a good range for him. You never know how skilled. Yeah, right. That'd be fun. So, all right. So after McBride, who's up next for you?
The next after that, there's a lot of guys who are flawed, I think, but interesting. There's Tucker, Miller, Tyon Evans is in that group for me. Chase Brown, Evan Hull. That's kind of all a big kind of chunk. But yeah, is there a particular guy in that group that's interesting to you? I could talk about any of them. So.
Yeah. I've talked about Tucker ad infinitum, so let's move on from that.
Okay.
I love Hull. I think you and me were on Hull Island super early. He had that one game that was just absurd in college football, and I had him on like every C2C because last year 20 21, I just do my like endless scrolling of guys and news reports, and I was like, he purportedly runs a 4.4. He's 210 pounds, and he catches a crap ton of passes on a bad offense. Like, sign me
Right.
up, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about him a little bit. So I mean, that's kind of where I'm at on him. I just don't know where the NFL's at on him, but my model has him as kind of on the lower end of draftable. I like him more than that, but I don't expect crazy draft capital from him. I just am very excited to have him on my team, even if he doesn't have draft capital.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I think I probably like him more than the draft capital I expect him to get. He's a 4-year guy who I don't remember if it was a redshirt year or if he got hurt as a freshman, but he went to Northwestern and didn't really do much until his 3rd season, which I mean, Northwestern's a Power 5 program, but that's not a production profile that screams, day 2 pick. So
Mm.
I think we're probably looking at like 6th round, maybe. But yeah, kind of the way you described him, right under 210 pounds. He runs sub 4.5. He's obviously a good receiver. That game I think you were talking about against Duke, he caught like 14 passes for 213 yards. He probably had 60 fantasy points that game. Like there aren't many guys. He was running like a varied route tree. He wasn't catching 14 screens in that game. It's wheel routes and angle routes and things beyond the line of scrimmage where he's beating coverage. He's a good player. He can one of the best receivers in this class, in my opinion. And I think he's a little bit more. I don't think he's a super. I haven't watched film, but based on the numbers, he doesn't look like a super like refined runner to me. Maybe his athleticism kind of helped him be efficient in college relative to his teammates, at least. I know this last year he wasn't very efficient, kind of on a base level, but he's another one of these guys who was on a bad team, was the best player on that offense, and was just getting fed the ball. He had like 50 receptions this year. He was just getting absolutely fed with defenses geared up almost solely to stop him. So of course he's not that efficient. But yeah, he's athletic. He's like 210 pounds. He catches passes, target share, speed score, dominant, like all these, the base level boxes that you want to see analytically, he checks. So I think you have to be interested in him at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot to like. Again, I think unrefined is a good way to describe him as a runner. Like what I did watch some film. I wanted to be more impressed than I was. He came
Okay.
away, like tepid, and I mean, and he
Yeah.
did get a pretty poor score from Zerline, which again, I think's deserved, but I don't know. I mean, I think he can do what Rachaad White did as a rookie if he gets on the field. The difference would be he's not going to get that draft capital. But I think that's a pretty good analogy. Like Rachaad White, more athletic than Hall for sure, just agility and explosiveness. But Hall is that good of a pass catcher. He's almost that athletic. I'd love to see him, work his way on to third downs and become like a 1B somewhere or something like that. I don't know if it's a pipe dream, but, and you're right too. I think he did have a redshirt year. So he's not, and he didn't get a wild amount of reps the year after that either. It was just last year that he actually got a real workload for the first time. So who knows? Maybe there's untapped potential there for him as well.
Yeah, I kind of like that Rachaad White comp. I comped him to just kind of based on athleticism and like general skill set, pass catcher, not the most refined runner. There's a little bit of Tony Pollard there as far as explosiveness and size and pass catching and things like that. Rachaad White's the same, kind of in the same general archetype. A guy like Charles Sims from, the last sort of generation of players. Like, even if you're not a guy who's going to run the ball even 10 times a game, there's value in being able to just be athletic, be able to make plays out in space, catch the ball reliably. I saw mixed reviews about him at the Senior Bowl as far as pass blocking and stuff like that. But, if he seems like the kind of guy who will do what it takes to make a roster, whether that's playing special teams or committing himself to being good in pass protection. So I like his chances of being one of these guys who's a low probability player who ends up, getting a solid role in the league.
Yeah. He's the kind of player that I tend to take in the 4th and 5th round of every rookie draft every year, because the upside, if they actually hit, is so much more than taking a guy that's going to be a wide receiver 7 or something. You know what I mean?
Right. Or a guy like Keaton Mitchell, compared to Evan Hull. Like Keaton Mitchell, stupid efficiency in college, stupid fast, and you see 4 threes, or whatever he ran. Is there much value for a guy like that in the NFL who's so small and he's not Achane, so what's Keaton Mitchell going to do? A guy like Evan Hull is much more interesting, despite not being like a crazy athlete. He's just a well-rounded guy that can find a way in the league in a couple different kind of areas, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think coaches will be able to use it. Yeah, like special teams, right? Like he'll find a role. You know what I mean? And he can. They see him as someone that can take backup carries, change of pace carries, and not be limited. I mean, I don't think he's a great zone runner. I think he's probably limited in that manner, but but not in the way that a 170-pound guy is. Keaton Mitchell reminds me a little bit of, gosh, I don't know if you were scouting running backs like this a couple years ago, but there was a kid from Coastal that was like this little tiny pint-sized electric guy, and I was sure he was going to be, the next like little receiving satellite back in the mold.
I know who you're talking about.
I thought he was so fun to watch, and he was explosive, and he just like 7th round draft pick, never got on the field.
No, I remember liking that guy too, from Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, he was like a mega producer. Coastal.
What the hell was his
name?
Remember the name. I gotta look it up.
Grayson? Was it a Grayson or something?
Grayson McCall's their quarterback.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, they had a running. I'm looking it up right now. I remember he played with Rock Ya-Sin at Central Arkansas. CJ Marable, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, it's Marable.
Yeah, yes. CJ Marable.
Anyway, that's what I think about Keaton Mitchell. He's CJ Marable.
Right. Yeah. We get one of these guys every year, like a Javian Hawkins or Bryce Love or Darrington Evans. Sometimes they go really high because somebody falls in love with the speed. Oftentimes they don't get drafted, or nothing really like Pierre Strong is much bigger than that, but I think he's a similar style player, like undersized, straight line speed. It's just tough for those guys to find a way in the league if they're not really good pass catchers. And Keaton Mitchell's doesn't. I haven't watched film on him either, but the numbers don't look like a guy who's like he's not Tariq Cohen out there as a receiver, probably.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I haven't done a deep dive on him, so I don't want to say too much, but that's the vibe I get. And so a name that you notably didn't say as part of your top 8 for me is Tank Bigsby. Where are you at on Tank?
Where am I at on Tank? I have him a little bit buried, right? Yeah, I've got him a little bit buried, and I'm looking at the numbers right now. Was that fair? Was it fair to bury Tank Bigsby? Let's see. Okay, well, Tank Bigsby, similar to, not to the same degree, but I think I care about him being athletic a little bit more than I care about a lot of guys in this class being athletic. And he was just kind of average at the combine as far as athleticism goes. He's got decent size, decent athleticism, maybe a little bit of pass catching. I thought he's sort of the Isaiah Spiller of this class to me, where, early on he was really nice. And then the numbers at the end of his career from an analytical perspective just don't look good. Like he just wasn't very efficient or consistent relative to the other guys at Auburn. And I know there's some good players at Auburn, like Jarquez Hunter is a legit player. But Achane was a good player too. And Spiller, it didn't end up mattering that Achane was good as far as Spiller's numbers go. Spiller just maybe can't play. And so one thing I noticed about Tank Bigsby though, is he tries to juke everybody. He is throwing
Yes.
dead legs and spin moves and jump cuts just constantly. I am able to track like how often are these guys attempting to make people miss, uh, and he is by far like the highest in the class. He's a I think he could run a little bit more physically than he does, and he kind of puts himself in this like Miles Sanders category of like trying to be super shifty when I think he could be a little bit better if he just put his head down.
I am with you. That is literally in my notes from him as well. Was like, dude, just plant and go upfield.
Yeah.
Um, although again, like context for me, I think he's trying to play hero ball because he was literally the offense for a shitty team for 3 years and he wants to win games. So I think he got some really bad habits of trying to do too much, to trying to make nothing into something all the time. And I don't think he was like that as a freshman at all. I think he like developed those habits because he wanted to go to the NFL, wants to play ball, you know. I mean, I'm spinning a narrative to defend him, which is never really like a good process. But like, I can see there being truth in that, and it kind of makes sense. I did watch a lot of him when he first broke out as a freshman, and that was my impression then was, man, got the ball, gone downhill, got the ball, gone downhill, make the guy miss. Like, I do really
Okay.
think that he had some better film earlier, but I love and hate the Isaiah Spiller comp. But I think if you look at the production profiles, um, not everything's similar, but the fact that they were just flat, right? That like Bigsby and Spiller both had kind of the same production every year of their career. They
Yeah.
didn't really accelerate and grow. They didn't own the backfield as juniors. And I remember the discourse from last year too. I think you were one of the first people that started to pop my Isaiah Spiller bubble. When you were doing the yards per carry plus. And then I have the data in here too, but I never really looked at it. And I remember scrolling down to try to find him, just being like, oh, fuck. This is bad. And just being like, there's no NFL players within like 7 pages of him on my
Right.
spreadsheet. He had like a 0.2 or something yards per carry plus. It
Yeah.
was abysmal. And my argument then was, well, but Achane is really good, which
Mhm.
is true, but also Spiller is just not that good. Both things
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
true, you know?
Yeah. And I do like that point you made about Bigsby, um, kind of playing hero ball because, when I looked into his numbers, I was kind of confronted with this, like the freshman season. It's not like he looked good on film and was productive, but the numbers, say maybe he was secretly bad. Like the numbers backed it up. He was awesome from like an analytical perspective and, apparently on film as a freshman, and then bad as a sophomore, bad as a junior. And it's like good players don't just suddenly become bad for no reason. And so you're spinning a narrative, but I think it's necessary in a situation like that. Like you have to find some way where this makes sense instead of just throwing up your hands and, I guess he's bad now. So I've also seen speculation that he was hurt throughout a lot of 2021 as a sophomore, which seems to make sense based on the massive disparity and like how effective he was from his freshman year, and then his sophomore year. And then if he developed bad habits during that season where he was hurt and playing on a bad team, that easily could have carried over to him as a junior. And I will say, when I saw him like in the open field and when he does just put his foot down, there are not a lot of guys in this class who look as good as he does. Like he's the full package when he puts it together on an individual play. He's fast, he's explosive, he's strong. He is, I mean, he's kind of like a Charbonnet type guy when it's working for him. And so if he can get out of those bad habits, or if that's what happened and he can get out of that, I think I'd be in on Bigsby, but it's just tough when we've got 2/3 of his career was not good. And it's like, I wish he was the freshman version, but we don't know if he'll ever get back to that. It's tough to figure out what to do with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you too. And honestly, of all the guys I watched, that was like one of my biggest things on Tank was just like, what are you doing, dude? Like just consistently like making bad plays and bad reads behind the line of scrimmage, bouncing things he shouldn't have. Like, so if I did grade on vision, he would probably have one of the worst grades of anyone in this class. But again, I just think you had to take a great assault. And then, Zerline liked him. He gave him a 6.2. That's a good score. You
Okay.
know, that's a better score than he gave McBride. It is the same score. Oh, almost the same as Evans, better than McIntosh. So, I mean, you know, it's not like a world beater, but that's an NFL player. You know, his grades aren't the Bible, but he has a process. He's been doing it a long time. I think it's nice for me to get an objective viewpoint for someone that, because I feel sometimes like my data, I do the data work first a lot, and that
Mm-hmm.
might color my film because I'm looking to marry the narrative sometimes, and the data is
Yeah.
pretty rough for Tank. I mean, when I first ran my model, I was like, he's dead to me, and I started trying to trade him in all my Canvas to Canton leagues, unsuccessfully,
Oh
unfortunately.
man.
All right, cool. I don't know how much time you got, or if you got stuff to do, but I'd like to get through a couple more guys. But if you're running out of time, just
Yeah,
let me know.
yeah. I think I have time for a couple more.
Okay, who else do you want to talk about? For me, I'd say Abanikanda is pretty interesting. Did he grade out well for you, or was he a little bit lower down the tro?
He's one of these guys where I think I was pretty easily able to kind of weave a narrative that made sense with the film and the numbers. He was very efficient, especially this last year, which was his kind of his only true year as the lead back at Pitt. But he was really productive, really efficient. And I see what everybody else sees on film, where he's like a see it, plant the foot and go, like explosive straight line runner with good speed, maybe really good speed and good size. But I think he runs. He doesn't run very big at all. Like he
No.
goes down uh very easily. He doesn't have much wiggle to his game. And he's not super powerful. I think he's actively not powerful, especially for his size and how fast he's moving, which makes him I think pretty dependent on his blocking. Like if there's a hole on, if it's a counter play and he's able to, follow and then just explode north south on the edge, he could take it to the house on any given play. But that's a really good trait. I didn't see a ton of other things for him that, like, if he's not on an NFL offense that's going to give him the ball enough times to, roll the dice and get some explosive plays, like what's his utility? I just, I don't know. I have a hard time seeing it, I guess. I think of him, the criticisms that I hear about Zach Evans, I think all apply, other than the size thing now, but the other criticisms of Evans, the on-field criticisms of Evans, spotty vision, doesn't fight for yards, but is like an explosive one-cut runner. That's exactly what Abanikanda is, as far as I'm concerned. So I see the explosiveness, and he's probably going to have like a rare combination of size and speed once we see him at his pro day. I just don't know that he has a lot else.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. Somebody posted a stat that did some data work, and I forget what the threshold was, but his missed forced tackles per attempt put him on a list with just nobody that has ever succeeded in the NFL. It was dark. It was a dark list. And when I got done watching his film, I was like, I don't really do comps, but I saw what you saw too. I was like, big guy, not powerful, super explosive. I was like, Kalen Balaj? Like, and I pissed a lot of people off on Twitter.
Yeah. I have numbers for 13 running backs in this class that I've watched like a substantial amount of film for. And if I sort them by how successful they were at breaking through contact, just in general, all sorts of contact, Abanikanda ranks 11th out of those 13. So, and below both Gibbs and Achane. So he's running with less power than guys who are 20, 30 pounds lighter than he is.
I bet Achane's in the middle on that anyways, right?
Yeah, Achane is 9th out of 13. So towards the lower part of the middle, but especially for how small he is, that's ridiculous,
Yeah. right, cool. So I guess two other guys that three other guys I'm interested in, and you could pick, and if you want to cut it off, let me know. But I'm somewhat interested in Erik Gray because he got a decent score and he catches passes. That's all I got on him for positives, really. And the model actually likes him a little bit, but again, I think that's because I juice the yards per route run. I run a teammate score, and his came out good for some reason, and the NFL.com film score. You got any? We don't have to go deep dive on all these guys, but are you out on him entirely? Is there a role he could, could he find his way to be a useful pass catcher?
Yeah, I don't have a great grasp on what I think about him right now. I'm like halfway through my film study with him, but his kind of play level grades look good. Other than he has a little bit of Tank Bigsby to him where he just tries to juke everybody, and I think his timing isn't very good on his. He uses a dead leg a lot. It's like his go-to move, and he gets a little too antsy where he'll go too quick, and then he's too far away to actually create separation between him and the defender, so he'll get tackled anyway. So I think a little bit more patience and better timing would make him really elusive because he's got the quickness and the explosiveness to do it. But his decision making, I think, is good as a runner, and the receiving numbers look good. I haven't done a super deep dive on him yet, but I'm tentatively interested and could see myself being much higher on him later than I am now. Just, if I kind of explore more and continue like fleshing out those positives.
Yeah, the receiving numbers are really good. 99 career receptions, 827 yards, 5 touchdowns. They're just solid numbers. 1.82 yards per route runs, a really good number as well. And his rushing numbers, I mean, it's just he's like falls directly into the mold of like a third down guy, right? Like rushing numbers were okay, but never outstanding. Nothing to write home about there. If he didn't have the receiving work, I would say he's a UDFA, honestly. Like his rushing numbers were worse than Kennedy Brooks's were, right? For the most part, running in the same offense. But the pass catching upside is intriguing, and he got a starter grade by a guy that's a scout, so I think there's something there. I'm trying to blast out a couple more quick hits. Tyjae Spears, who I have done very little work on, so I don't have much of a take, except for the numbers do look. A lot of the efficiency numbers look pretty good. The my elusiveness numbers. Have you done any work on him yet?
Yeah, I have watched Spears. I thought the comps that Jahmyr Gibbs is getting, the Alvin Kamara comps, I think as a runner fit for Tyjae Spears better. He's slippery and weird and has that kind of strange, like subtle contact balance in the same way that Kamara does. So he's a really fun runner to watch. I didn't love his decision making for the most part. I think he's below average there, but and I also am not sure what he looks like as a receiver. I haven't done that deep dive yet, but he's a guy who's good out in space. I think he's a little bit like Aaron Jones to me, just kind of generally speaking, like an undersized guy who breaks tackles and is maybe explosive. I think. I don't have him as high up in this class as a lot of people do, and I think he was getting a lot of buzz like a month ago, where people were talking about him as like the RB3, which I think was a little bit silly,
a little premature.
Yeah, he's solidly in that group with like Kendre Miller and Tucker and those types of guys for me, where depending on how the offseason goes, I could see him being like a fringe top 5 guy in this class, or I could see him falling out of the top 10 altogether. But he's a fun player, dynamic with the ball in his hands. I just don't know what that looks like, for fantasy or in the NFL at this point.
Yeah, I got a good score from Zerline, and then just looking at the numbers, like the PFF numbers, the 908 yards after contact is a really good number. Yeah, you're a G5 guy. Breakaway yards were like above the threshold for my average NFL back for the top 24 season. Breakaway percentage of 55%, again, over the average for NFL backs for top 24 season. as was his yards after contact per attempt. So those are interesting numbers. A lot of those actually play pretty well in terms of having some correlation to fantasy success. And then there is the highlight of him just dusting some at the Senior Bowl on a route in gym shorts.
Yeah.
That's why he was everyone's RB3 that week.
I forgot about that. Yeah, where he looked like Andy Isabella out there, like 4 different like head fakes, and then dropped to his knees, and then
hand down in the dirt. But yeah, interesting to me. I feel like unless the hype dies down, the hype's going to be too much, and I'm just going to have 0 shares of him.
That's very
which
possible.
would make me sad. So yeah, I don't want to hold you hostage. I think the last guy that's worth talking about, because no one talks about him really at all, and he's interesting to me post combine, especially, is Chase Brown. I mean, super producer last year. Production profile was shaky before then, but he had a really bad injury in 2021, or even in 2020. I feel like that he was coming back from in 21. I don't know. Did you get to do any film work on Chase?
Yeah, I did actually. I kind of crammed his film work this week, so I just finished that, and I think much better. Let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. Better zone runner than gap runner. He's another one of these patient guys, but he also has this for whatever reason, he's got a much better patience grade on zone concepts than he does on gap concepts. I don't know if he just has a hard time pacing himself or, staying under control on gap concepts, but looks like a better zone runner, or at least graded out as a better zone runner for me. But his rushing efficiency numbers look really nice, and he's quite the athlete. So, and has decent size now. He's like 5'9", 209, that's very solid.
It's Kenny Walker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting to me. And I think that's kind of like the type of player he is too, right? Like tons of missed forced tackles, explosiveness, can catch the edge consistently on film. I don't think he's as good as Ken Walker, but I think Walker's really good. But I think that's kind of like the mold and, the upside for him in the NFL if he does like completely hit his ceiling, right?
Yeah. And I think he's also kind of like Evan Hull. I think he's one of these guys who's just worked hard to stick around. Like he transferred from Western Michigan, had, kind of some up and down seasons where he's, dealing with whatever, but he is in really good shape. I mean, he was rocked up at the Senior Bowl, obviously workout warrior, ran really fast. Like he just seems like one of these guys who has a good work ethic and is going to do what it takes to stay on a team. Like I don't see him as a UDFA or a guy who gets cut in training camp or anything like that. He seems like a roster player with a good enough all-around skill set that if he gets opportunity, he'll have usable weeks probably.
You think he gets draft capital?
I don't think anything crazy. I would, maybe start looking for him in like the 5th round, but
yeah. All right. Any one other player you want to throw out a couple quick thoughts on that, we've glossed over or missed that you think's relevant?
I haven't done a ton of work on these other guys. I think we covered pretty much everybody that I've watched a lot of film for. But
you mentioned someone that was completely off my map.
Tyjae Evans
from Tennessee. Yeah, Tyjae Evans.
Yeah. He Tennessee, then Louisville last year, but yeah, Tyjae Evans I think is interesting. He started out at Hutchinson Community College. I think he had some issues with his grades or something, but that's the same community college that Alvin Kamara went to. It's kind of like a hot spot for, like top level guys who, need to kill a year before going back to D1 or whatever. He was ridiculously efficient there, like far more efficient at the junior college level than Rachaad White was, or even Kamara was. Like he was really impressive at that level. Went to the SEC, played for Tennessee for a year, was really efficient in the SEC, transferred to Louisville, I believe to be closer to his son, was really efficient at Louisville. He's never been the lead back anywhere, except for maybe Hutchinson, but, whatever. but he's 225 pounds. He's 5'9". He's like a Doug Martin built guy. He runs 4.52. He breaks tackles. I think he's strictly a gap runner. I don't think he has a whole lot of creativity or, I don't want to trust him to pick his spots in a zone scheme, but as a gap runner, he's explosive, he's powerful, he's low to the ground. I think he's one of the better pure runners, at least on gap concepts in this class. I think I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get some work in an NFL backfield.
Yeah, kind of guy that gets day 3 capital, gets a job in camp, and gets some carries. I could see it. He's been like good everywhere he's been, right? The overall data profile is, not inspiring, but he has some nice numbers, like rush yards over expected, rush yards over team, right? Like some nice numbers there that do indicate maybe a little bit of talent. So, right, I'd love to keep it and talk about 20 more running backs, but I wouldn't do that to you, my man. But I mean, it is always awesome having you on the show, and I'm so stoked for you that the site is taking off. So again, like, Noah can plug it better than me, but NoahMoreParties.com is the spot for all of Noah's work, everything you need to know about the running backs in this class, and it's just the beginning of Noah's budding running back empire. You got anything else you want to plug? BDG stuff or?
Yeah, I'm on the BDG YouTube channel on Wednesdays and Saturdays nowadays. So, find me there. Always good stuff coming through the pipeline there. But yeah, NoMoreParties.com. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, Erik. I needed to talk about these running backs, so I'm glad we could connect.
It is fun, right, man? I like to flesh out our ideas and bounce them off each other. I always walk away from these conversations with a little bit more in my back pocket than I had when we started.
For sure.
So that's it, everybody. If you tuned in, you hung in here with us, I appreciate it. Make sure you hit the like. Make sure you hit the subscribe. We got tons more content coming at you. Guest stars coming on every week from now until the draft. And then we'll be rolling into our regular college preview and NFL draft type content for 2023. So we're stoked to have you here. I can't thank Noah enough, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good night.